Hello everyone, welcome to Narayan IIS, and as a part of daily news analysis, we bring the 5 most important articles to you from The Hindu and Indian Express. And in continuation of the same series, today's 5 articles are: number 1, the inflation data, which suggests a divergence in inflation, in which the inflation overall is reducing, but the food inflation is spiking, which cause multiple policy issues. Second, we will discuss what is hydrogel, where the IISc has designed hydrogel to deal with the microplastic. Third, we will examine the volcanic vortex ring. What are they? We will examine them from the geographical perspective. Fourth, we will move towards CP Suraksha scheme and how it distributes the subsidies to our horticulture farmers. Lastly, we will talk about the land conflict, where the majority or the 1/3 of the land conflict is due to the poor implementation of the Forest Right Act. So in this video, we will examine all of them. And lastly, we will discuss the prelims and mains question related to these topics in order to make it comprehensive. So let's start with first article, that is inflation showed yet no relief on food bills. It is significant in terms of the effect of liberalization in economy will be part of it. So you should actually not skip it. It's important, even you can see in terms of the previously mains question has been asked around this topic, because once you understand inflation, you will realize how it is actually due to the supply chain inefficiency, supply chain management, and it is due to the country shift directly from the agriculture to the later to services. So understanding of this topic is actually going to help you answer some other questions as well in UPSC. So it's very important to understand. Now let's move ahead that why are we talking about inflation? Because like I said, the news talk about how inflation data is there, in which you see a divergence, where at one hand, overall inflation is reducing. If you club all the data, inflation from service sector, manufacturing sector and food sector, overall inflation is coming down. But on the other hand, the food inflation is spiking up. So what is the reason behind such a divergence when the prices are coming down for everything but not for the food items? To support this, actually what I'm saying, you can see what is being mentioned in the news itself. It shows that India's retail inflation overall, retail inflation that we measure by CPI, I will not discuss that in that article because it will be too long. The CPI measures that our overall inflation is lower to a 10-month low of 4.85% from 5% earlier. And however, but the food inflation has spiked to 8.6% from 8.52%. So see, the data clearly suggests what I was saying. Another diverging factor that we saw in the news was that urban consumers are actually among the urban consumer, we are seeing a drop in inflation. In cities, the inflation is actually coming down, but in rural areas, there is unexpected rise in inflation. Like in urban consumer, we saw a drop in inflation from 4.8 to 4.14%. But in case of rural area, we see increase in inflation from 5.34 to 5.45, which is actually also reflective in the food inflation as well. In the rural area and urban area, food inflation, when you compare in the two particular segments. Like in rural food inflation, it has accelerated to 8.3 to 8.6%, whereas urban food inflation has come down from 9.2 to 8.35%. And the data also says that major contributor to this food inflation are basically articles like cereals, meat, vegetables, pulses, spices, eggs, etc. So the question that comes over there is, number one, why inflation is rising? Why are we seeing that such kind of divergence where overall inflation is coming down? But often over the year, we have realized that food inflation is visible in India, even if the total inflationary trends have come down. Firstly, to understand what is inflation. Inflation is nothing. Inflation is actually general rise in prices of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. Three things are important over here. Number one, the price of commodity and services are rising, general rise. And second, it's over the period of time. Time we consider often in year, 6 months, if quarterly data is there or a monthly data is there, general increase in price over a period of time of goods and services in an economy. I'm not talking about one particular store or anything. No, we are talking about entire economy, entire state, entire nation. entire economy over a period of time. That is called as inflation. Like you see, we can see the articles of shoes. Like last year, maybe the shoes that you got over 200 rupees, this year you will get around 300 rupees. And next year, they will be around 400 rupees. So this general increase in price is called as inflation. Now, what are the factors that are impacting the inflation, that are causing the inflation or rise in prices? Now, the article talks about there are recent immediate factor which you can take into account that why the prices are rising. Article says some factors have are to do with the global trend that is going on right now. That because of some global factor, Indian economy is also impacted. Now, example over there is overall the prices of oil is spiking. The prices of oil, the petroleum oil is rising because of the conflict in the Middle East. Now you can see Israel-Palestine conflict, the conflicts in the Red Sea area. So as a result of which the prices are rising, the shipping cost is also rising. And ultimately, you know that petroleum and oil are used in transportation. So the transportation costs will rise for any commodities, including the agriculture commodity. So the agriculture is actually bearing the brunt of that because the supply chain has become expensive now. Second is, it is also talking about that how the global economies are also experiencing inflation, like US. So the commodities are expensive outside. We are also importer and we are integrated in global economy. So we are also vulnerable to global trend. So Indian economy is also experiencing inflation due to the inflation in US. And more so because as a result of US inflation, the interest rate cut we will not see. And when we don't see interest rate cut, the flow of money, the dollar from the US will come down. You know that because now dollar is more lucrative because dollar will give you more interest rate, right? America is not cutting down the interest rate. Dollar is more lucrative. People will invest in dollar, especially in American assets. So they will not invest in Asia. The flow of money will be lesser to Asian countries and the growth will be impacted. Overall inflation trend can be seen over there. And in fact, the exchange rate will be hurt and India is very sensitive to exchange rate. That article also says it's not just the global trend. You can see the mix of global and domestic trend as well. And in specific talk about the climate change, especially the heat waves. That is a result of heat waves, our agriculture productivity is going to be reduced. Now, since the productivity will be reduced, the supply will come down, but the demand will stay the same. And when supply comes down, demand is same, you know the inflation is bound to come because inflation is caused by such factor that so much money is chasing too much commodities. Too much money chasing too less commodity will cause the inflation. So of course there is going to be inflation because of this. Ultimately, so these are the factors that we see these days. But you will see that India is vulnerable to such factor not because of the immediate cause or concern that has risen in past few days. It's because that structurally India is more vulnerable to food inflation. And why am I saying so? Why is that India is more vulnerable to food inflation? It's because of the structural transition that India has gone through, the kind of economy that we have inherited. Now you will see before independence, India was primarily an agriculture dominated economy. And we were trying to promote manufacturing as well. But before manufacturing could actually reach its height, in 1990s, we went for the liberalization and we promoted the service sector. And all of a sudden, India moved from agricultural to service sector. And we know these days, the service sector contribute to nearly like 40 to 50% of India's GDP. And it's giving employment to too many people. In this transition, what we forgot is a manufacturing sector. Not only in terms of its contributing to India's GDP or employment, most important role of manufacturing sector is to provide cost-effective technologies to the country. And often in lack of these cost-effective technologies, the indigenization has not taken place and we are dependent on expensive technology. Now, when we are dependent on expensive technology, we cannot integrate easily into our economy, especially farmers. Farmers are very poor. They would want indigenous technology, the cost-effective technologies to integrate in agriculture. Now, as a result of poor integration of these technology, Indian economy is very vulnerable to the climate change and it's not very sustainable. And let me give you an example of that. The first example is that India is still dependent on monsoon because of the poor integration of irrigation facilities, irrigation technologies. Here I'm specifically talking about micro irrigation technologies. If we had micro irrigation technology, we would not have been so much dependent on monsoon. As we see in Israel, that since they have micro irrigation technologies, they're not very dependent on monsoon. It makes sure that with lesser water, they have more production. But in case of India, whenever the monsoon doesn't show up on time, or it actually brings a less amount of waterfall, the production is reduced. Again, the supply is lesser, the demand is high, the price variability we can always see. So you see, it is because of we don't have technology. And that's not an only example. We see that even in case of supply chain deficiency overall. Any agriculture commodity is to be transferred on time from the farm to producer, to actually market, or to consumer like us. And whenever that supply is on time, the farmer is able to get the better price, finer price. But most important, its goods are not destroyed in the process, especially perishable items, because agriculture produces perishable items that they lose their life within few days, 1 or 2 days. It has to be moved from farmer to consumer. Now, because of we don't have proper technology, especially the transport, the warehousing and storage of technology that should have been given to the farmer has to dispose of their items within few days after the production. As a result, it creates what? Seasonal dependence. So in one season, the market is flooded with items and the prices of tomato are less. But just after that, there is no, like, tomatoes are lesser in market and the prices automatically increase. We all know at what time tomato will be priced less and what time tomato will be priced low. Why? Because we don't have storage facilities. We don't have warehousing facilities where perishable items can stay alive or stay edible for a long time. So another problem that you can see over there is this: we don't have enough warehousing and storage facilities, because of which the perishable items die. Also, when we realize that in this entire supply chain technology, we don't have enough transportation connectivity, the conditions of road is not good, the other the supporting infrastructure is not available, ultimately, it also hurt our food processing industry, which relies on all of this in order to be sufficient. If we had the food processing industry, we are able to increase the shelf life of products. But in absence of it, the shelf life doesn't increase. So what is going to happen? We are dependent on monsoon. We are dependent on climate. We are dependent on condition. And we have lesser resilient. And that's the reason the food prices are always going up and down. So always remember, this is something you will not miss, that in India, what we see is, we see inflation as a result of the immediate condition or immediate changes that are taking place in global and domestic area, but also whatever that is going on in the Indian economy, like overall, over the decade. Now, what are the implications for that? If we want to understand the implication of food inflation, we have to see at the two sides, number one and producer. Overall, when inflation doesn't stay in its bracketed area or targeted area, the RBI has set the target to 4 to 6%. Within that range, it is allowed. It's actually 4%, and 2% variation is allowed from 2% to 6%. When inflation doesn't stay contained, RBI has to increase interest rate. So producer can't take loan easily. They cannot invest in further production. The production become expensive. So overall, the production is impacted as a result of food inflation. Second is, it's going to impact the consumers. Their purchasing power is going to be impacted, and specifically to buy the food products. They're not able to buy food products, which is going to threaten India's food security, India's nutritional security. And even if they're able to buy food products, they will not have enough money to buy other essential social goods like education and health, which is again going to be impacted. And this is visible in terms of angel law, that when food prices increases, the poor are impacted most, because for poor, they spend majority of their income on the food items. When food prices increase, the majority of their popular income is gone and they cannot invest anywhere. It is visible, like even the angel law says the same thing, that when the income level rises, it says the same thing, right? When the income level rises, the proportion of income that is spent on food reduces. The overall expenditure rises, but the proportion of income that is spent on food reduces. That means the poor spend more money on food. So it is going to put marginalized people more at what? They become more vulnerable. They're more at the mercy of the monsoon and more at the mercy of the prices. What can we do in such a scenario? Number one, central bank has maintained the perspective that RBI is going to maintain the inflation targeting of 4%. It will make sure that inflation doesn't breach this target of 4%. It will stay below 6% and above 2%. Also, it is RBI also says that the data suggests that inflation is going to stay at around 4.5 this year, unlike it was 5% which was last year. So it is in comfortable range. But overall, what we can see is, we can see that the existing conditions like climate conditions, global economic trend are exerting actually significant influence on India's inflationary trajectory, which impact not only consumer but our monetary policy decisions. So it is very important that we come up with some solution for that. Then what are the solution? What can we do in such a case? Now, whenever we come up with such a like challenging aspect in an Indian economy, we come up with two kinds of solution. Number one is short term, that is, let's just put up the fire, and long term, in which prevent all of the causes that can cause the fire. So short-term solutions over here include, number one is the approach that is used by central bank. Now, what central bank does is, central bank under its mandate of inflation targeting, which is part of Monetary Policy Committee (MPC), it increase the interest rate of taking loan. Now, when you can't take loan easily from the bank, your capacity to you don't have enough money, the liquidity rise, and you're not going to buy products as well. So thus the inflation is contained as a result of this measure. Second is certain policy approach as well. Like government, what it does is, it put quota restriction on export, like certain essential agriculture commodity you can't export. Second, it import those items which are in shortage, like it has tried to import onion whenever it was in shortage. Third is open market selling of those products, whichever are expecting actually high prices. Like in 2013, the great inflation of India, the government was actually selling street on the market. There was open market operation. The government stuck with their selling the onion on the market. And similar thing happened around 2021 when the 2022 when the tomato prices were really high. But how can we these are like putting up the fire. But how to prevent those kind of fire is by taking the long-term route. Like number one, we have to bring the structural reform in agriculture. How? Number one, subsidy to agriculture extension services. Since lack of integration of technology is a major cause, the agriculture extension services or technology should be subsidized by the government, especially focusing on the micro irrigation facilities. Number two is the promotion of food processing industry. Via how can we do that? Like promoting farmers' education, awareness about how by processing their products they can actually avail better prices. Initial hand holding to them, like by giving capital subsidy. If they're taking loan from the bank, the capital subsidy can be given. Thus, overall, we can promote the Sampada scheme, which is also dedicated to food processing industry. But lastly, for everything to be realized, we have to give infrastructural support to the entire economy in terms of transportation, in terms of connectivity, in terms of warehousing, and in terms of storage facilities, which I've already talked here. Now, let's move to the next topic, that is about hydrogel and microplastic. Now, why are we talking about that? Because the polythene like plastic waste and e-waste, UPSC is very interested in them. And I've even asked question in the previous issues. Per se, in 2019, it asked the question that extended producer responsibility, which was introduced recently, it is in response to which of the following? Like biomedical waste, recycled waste, e-waste, or food safety and standard regulation of India. Now go to home and try to answer that question. But now let's move ahead. And why are we talking about microplastics and hydrogel? Because recently the researchers at IISc have developed a very sustainable hydrogel to remove the microplastic from the environment, which is a unique polymer network and nanocluster to decay the contaminant. So let's understand what is hydrogel. But before understand, we ought to know what are microplastic and why are we trying to remove them from the environment. Number one, what are microplastic? According to UNEP, the microplastics are basically tiny particles with a diameter of up to or less than 5 millimeter. So if a plastic has such diameter, it is basically declared as a microplastic. These microplastics are a result of incomplete breakdown of plastic and any household fiber. Also remember, the major two common microplastics that exist in nature are polyvinyl chloride and polypropylene. Now, after understanding microplastic, it is also important to know that it is acting as a hazard to our ecosystem right now. And as the data suggests, around 75 to 199 million tons of microplastic is currently in the world's ocean. Here, I'm not only talking about plastic, but microplastic. Plastic is such a nuisance, we already know, because of the existence of a Great Pacific patch that we found, because of clogging of drainage, and it is because it is littered everywhere. But microplastic has become even more dangerous than the plastic that we have known. Now, and how is it dangerous? Because number one, it is ingested by marine organism, and according to UNEP report, it itself says that the 90% of the marine birds are found to have microplastic in their throats. They have ingested it, so they are already under the threat of microplastic, which causes physical blockage, reduce feeding, and in the long term, it causes a threat to the biodiversity, to the ecosystem. Like example over here is, or even a benthic habitat like coral reef, which are such an important ecotone species, which are important for the sustainable ecosystem, are under threat because of even existence of microplastic. And it's not just biodiversity, other than human being that is suffering. Human being will also suffer because this microplastic is capable of bioaccumulation. That means it can go up in the food chain. So it can accumulate. If it is only 10 mm in this particular person, this can become 20 mm in the second chain of food web. So, and through this bioaccumulation, it can even enter the human body. So even it's not just other organisms that are ingesting microplastic. We are also ingesting microplastic through this process. And plastic with itself is a hazard alone itself. It is also capable of absorbing many pollutants like heavy metals. So as a result, human beings suffer from many diseases like inflammatory responses in human cells. It can penetrate other healthy tissues as well, like kidney, placenta, and liver, causing multiple health issues to the human society as well. And thus, it is important to deal with microplastic, and hydrogel is an initiative by which we can deal with this. Now, what are hydrogel? To understand hydrogel, just remember, hydrogel is basically the sum of two components. The first component is a polymer component, and the second component is a nanoparticle component. The polymer is itself made up of three polymer chains. The three polymer chains in here is chitosan, polyvinyl alcohol, and polyaniline. As a result, it forms another compound, that is interpreting polymer network, and IPN is formed because of the mix of these three polymer articles. Now, this polymer network is infused in a nanocluster. And what is this nanocluster? This nanocluster is nothing but it is a copper substitute polyoxometallic, POM. So a mix of IPM and POM makes what is called as hydrogel. Now what it is, why it is important? Because it is a very strong catalyst. Catalyst is something which can promote a reaction, which can promote an action. It is a very strong catalyst. That is when on a microplastic, if a UV rays act on them, the hydrogel actually catalyzes a reaction. It promotes a reaction. So hydrogel is going to catalyze this reaction, and that's why it is considered as very effective mechanism of removing the microplastic. And thus, the combination of polymer and nanocluster resulted in a strong hydrogel with ability to absorb and degrade large amount of microplastic. And it's not a joke over here, because according to IISc, it has very high efficiency in terms of it could remove 95 to 93% of two different types of microplastic in water at a more neutral pH. And I talked about already two existing microplastic, that is polyvinyl and other polymer that are existing. So it is capable of removing both of them at the efficiency of 95% and 93%. So let's start with an article. And why are we talking about this article, that is volcanic vortex ring? Because volcanoes are one of the favorite topics of UPSC. You can see in the question that is asked by UPSC in 2018, the question is, the Barren Island volcano is an active volcano located in Indian territory. Second statement, Barren Island lies about 140 km east of Great Nicobar, and last time the Barren Island volcano erupted was in 1991, and it has remained inactive ever since then. You can see it has not only asked about the Barren Island volcano, but a very great detail about it. And that's the reason volcanoes and a detail about this are important for UPSC examination perspective. So let's start with, why are we talking about volcanic vortex ring? Because just about a week ago, our news was there that the Etna has been releasing dozens of gas rings, that is volcanic vortex ring, every day. So number one, let's understand what a volcanic vortex ring. So these rings are nothing but a ring formed with a mix of 2-3 articles, like number one is dusty particle, number two gas, And here the most specific gas is water vapor. When the dusty particle and the gas particles like water vapor, they come together and are shot from the vent at a higher speed, often they form a particular shape. And here in the volcanic vortex ring, the shape is basically circular. So these particles are coming out from a vent at a high speed in the form of circular. It's basically volcanic vortex ring. And you may have seen this phenomena while somebody is smoking. When they smoke, a ring is formed around a cigarette. Similar thing a volcano is doing over here. So the ring is formed when a gas, a particularly water vapor, is swiftly released through a vent in a volcanic crater. These are circular in shape and often become circular in shape if the vent of the crater is also circular in shape. So here, the circularity of the vent often creates the circular shape in them. And generally, they tend to last for 10 minutes or lesser than that. But even in turbulent weather, they last for lesser period because the turbulence just disturbs the entire shape. The examples are given over there. Just pause the video for a second and go through them. Examples of the volcanic vortex ring are found, like Redoubt in Alaska, like Tungurahua in Ecuador, Pacaya in Guatemala, or even Stromboli in Italy, or Sakurisma in Japan. So multiple examples are over there. You can just go through them. Now, we have to ask question, what is Mount Etna? Because for UPSC it is important. So Mount Etna is nothing but it is actually the highest Mediterranean island of all the island found in Mediterranean place. It is one of the highest, it is highest Mediterranean island mountain and most active stratovolcano in the world. Don't worry, I will not miss what a stratovolcano. We'll discuss about that. But right now, remember, this is one of the most active stratovolcano in this world, which is located on east coast of Sicily. And it is not only the largest of the volcano in Europe, but one of the most active and iconic volcanoes globally. And perhaps for that reason, in 2013, UNESCO declared this particular the Mount Etna as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, the question that comes here is, number one, what are actually stratovolcano? But before that, for your map practice, keep in mind where does Sicily lie. Sicily is basically here, Mount Etna, Sicily, which is just below the Italy or part there. And it is surrounded by 3 oceans on the side, Tyrrhenian Sea, Ionian Sea, and Mediterranean Sea. Now, let's go back to stratovolcanoes. Stratovolcanoes are nothing but they are the volcanoes with relatively steeper side as compared to other shield volcano. Now you have known that 2 kinds of volcanoes in geography. There are 2 kinds of volcanoes that are found. Number one, that have actually steeper side, and other one that flows like that. Okay, generally basic volcanoes, they have lesser viscosity. They can flow easily, and they form shield volcano like that. But these are composite volcanoes which are formed by the acidic material, silica-based material. When they dominate, the material is not able to flow down too much. So the site is very steeper. They are tall in height. So stratovolcano is basically an example of that. These are volcanoes with steep site and more cone-shaped than shield volcano. See, these are shield volcano, steeper, less steeper, flat like that. And steeper volcanoes are basically stratovolcano. They are formed from viscous sticky lava. Like I told you, basic lava have less viscosity. Acidic lava has more viscosity. So they tend to be like that. And lava therefore builds up around the vent, forming a volcanic steep sides. So I hope you understand that. It's a geographical concept and easy to understand. So these are stratovolcanoes. And with this, we are done with this article. Now let's start with the next article. That is a platform that will instantly disperse subsidies to farmer. Now, why is it important? Because the previous question can you can understand the government tried to ask about the scheme that are helping the marginalized section of society. Like example here is a priority sector lending by bank in India constitute the lending to number 1 agriculture, number 2 micro and small enterprise, number 3 weaker section, and number 4 all of the above. So any scheme that helps farmer or marginalized section or small industries is important to UPSC examination. And thus we are going to understand this particular scheme. What is the scheme? Why is it important? Because Union government recently launched a scheme that is CDP Suraksha, which is designed to distribute subsidies to horticulture farmer as a part of cluster development program, which is an initiative to enhance the cultivation of horticulture crop in India or across the country. So now first let's understand what is CDP Suraksha.
Now here in CDP of course stands for the Cluster Development Program, and the Suraksha is actually a full form where it stands for System for Unified Resource Allocation, Knowledge and Secure Horticulture Assistance. That means it is a scheme that is trying to provide assistance or support to horticulture farmer through a centralized digital platform. So it has created a digital platform by which the horticulture farmer can access subsidy. Now, how is that done? It makes sure that immediately subsidy is distributed to farmer. They don't have to wait. They don't have to depend on bureaucratic process or any officer. The moment they ask for the subsidy is given to them through this platform. And this is achieved using e-rupee voucher system. So in order to do so, we will use what? We will use an e-rupee voucher system. Now, what is e-rupee voucher system? E-rupee is basically a payment mechanism which is being electronic payment mechanism developed by the National Payment Corporation of India. So NPCI has created a electronic payment mechanism which is cashless as well as contactless, and it operates by sending vouchers to beneficiary which can be used for specific purpose. Now I've told you so much, but I think you'll be able to better understand if I explain you the entire mechanism. Okay, so how does it work? Number one, what farmer does is whenever farmer want to buy anything, he will have a mobile phone with him and he will simply log into that application using his mobile phone. And from that, he will order supply. Suppose he wants to buy fertilizer, he wants to buy seed, he will buy it. And by placing the order, he will pay the partial amount, a partial cost. Like if it is 100 rupees item that he's buying, he will pay 60 rupees and 40 rupees he is actually a subsidy that is given to him. So 100 rupees item, he will only pay 60 rupees and he's done. Like he has accessed the benefit there itself. Now, how does the mechanism work after this? For this, he will get a e-rupee voucher, and implementing e-rupee voucher, and then a supplier will supply the item to his house. He will check the item after he has received. The farmer confirms that he has received the item, and then the implementing agency will actually pay the supplier the remaining 40 rupees. The remaining 40 rupees that farmer did not pay at the time of buying our items, now the implementing agency will pay that to the supplier when it actually submit the proof and paperwork, when the farmer is done with that. So farmer does not have to wait for any bureaucratic process or anything. And thus it is a very seamless, contactless process to make sure that subsidy is immediately distributed to farmer. And that's what is called as instant subsidy dispersal system. Now it has other features as well. Like it provides for the platform integration, where the platform or the other ministries' database is also integrated. Example is like PM Kisan scheme. And this integration helpline in streamlining the process of identifying eligible farmer and distributing the subsidies directly. So with the help of existing scheme like PM Kisan, they can easily identify the beneficiary farmer, and they can make sure that they are part of the subsidy distribution system. It has also some other advanced feature, like it utilizes cloud-based server space from the NIC or National Information Center. It also includes a content management system for effective handling of data, because often exclusion of beneficiary happen when there is exclusion of data, when the data is not available to anyone. Now, by the means of cloud computing, it is accessible everywhere. By means of content management system, it is made sure that inclusion is the kind of inefficiency they don't have to see. It also features geotagging to ensure a precise delivery of the services and resources. And that is a very comprehensive scheme which is trying to utilize technology to make sure that the beneficiary is getting the benefit it is actually entitled to. Now, what is Cluster Development Program? Again, we can ask that. It is a part of National Horticulture Board scheme aimed at leveraging geographical speciality of horticulture cluster and enhancing market-driven development across the various stages from pre-production to marketing. Basically, the National Horticulture Board often comes with a scheme in order to promote the horticulture. CDP is part of this, where it leverages the geographical specialty of horticulture cluster. Like we know, if we go to the Rajasthan, there the fruits some fruits are very famous over there, like guava. So there is a cluster that is found over there. this particular cluster development scheme makes sure that it targets one. That means it doesn't target one individual farmer, it targets a cluster of farmer, because the economy of scale always gives a better advantage to farmer. And it's a market-driven scheme which targets all the steps from the pre-production to marketing, and thus it tries to promote the horticulture development by taking care of all the steps. Okay, now what is the difference between old system and new system? Now, there is a clear-cut difference here. In the old system, farmer had to pay full amount upfront. Like if they have to avail any benefit, first they will pay 100 rupees. And then the benefit will come to them through any bank system or then any other mechanism, or cash they'll have to depend on bureaucratic system. Thus, the earlier mechanism required them to be dependent on the official after the purchase. An official would actually then ask for the bribe in order to be given the benefit that is they're entitled to. So there was a lot of corruption in the existing process in the old system. But now the subsidy is given directly to them without any kind of intervention by any official. So the payment is very upfront. And there is an immediate payment mechanism to the vendor as well. There was immediate payment mechanism to vendor in the earlier scheme. The vendor was getting the money all the time, but the farmer was not getting. Now, in this particular scheme, the farmer is the first priority. Farmer is getting the subsidy on time, and the payment only, and the vendor only give the money after farmer confirms the payment, like the mechanism I discussed earlier. So I hope you understood this topic. Now we will move to the next article. Now let's start with the next and the last article. That is a third of lead conflict in constituency where forest right key issue for election. So the election perspective is here, but we will discuss it from the perspective of Forest Right Act because that is important to UPSC. And UPSC has directly asked question, like in 2019, it asks, as per recent amendment to Indian Forest Act of 1927, forest dweller have the right to fell the bamboo grown on forest areas. Number 2, as per Scheduled Tribe and other traditional forest dweller, that is recognition of Forest Right Act 2006, bamboo is a minor forest produced. Again, the Scheduled Tribe and other traditional forest dweller, that is Forest Right Act of 2006, allow the ownership of minor forest produced to forest dweller. So directly, the two statements are taken from the Forest Right Act. So never actually underestimate this article. UPSC can anytime ask this in mains as well as prelims. So now why are we talking about that? Because recently a report has said that of the entire land conflict that has taken place in India, 1/3 of the land-related conflict are related to constituency where the Forest Right Act was to be implemented. So it is an important election issue as well, which is a political term, but this is an important use in significance to the tribal right. Now, number 1, what is Forest Right Act? Because the questions has been asked. Number 1, Forest Right Act, or it is also called as Scheduled Tribe and other traditional forest dwellers recognition of Forest Right Act of 2006. Like in question, you were hearing it again and again. And here I'm referring it to FRA. It's basically a short form this particular act. So it is a piece of legislation implemented by the central government in order to not only recognize but also secure the rights of tribal community. It wanted to recognize as well as secure the right of tribal communities and traditional forest dweller over their forest land and resources. In short form, it just wanted that the tribal was always saying that they have right over some forest land, and this particular act recognized the tribal right over the forest land, not the entire land, but a particular stream of land. And how does government intend to do so? This act actually identifies the beneficiary as well. It actually identifies two kinds of beneficiary. That is, number 1, the categories Scheduled Tribe who are residing in forest or using forest land for bona fide livelihood purpose prior to December 30, 2005. So they created the limit that whosoever was living in forest prior to December 2005 to take a minimum livelihood from the forest, a sustainable livelihood, is actually entitled to that particular forest land. Other category it created was other traditional forest dwellers, that is OTFT, that is those are non-scheduled tribe. Upper one, the previous one was the scheduled tribe. The second category of the forest dweller but non-scheduled tribe. Now these are also eligible for the rights over the land if they are residing in forest or forest land for 3 generations, that is 75 years prior to December 30, 2005. So December 13, 2005 is basically a date. But then it's created two categories, the scheduled tribe forest dwellers and non-scheduled tribe forest dwellers. So if you're a non-scheduled tribe, you not only have to reside, but your previous three generations should also be residing over there. And now once the beneficiaries identify themselves, in order to be eligible, they need to take documents that is issued by the government, panchayat, or self-certification by the elder of the community and other credible form of evidence in order to avail the particular benefit, that is the right over the land. Now, this act not only identifies the individual right or individual tribal right over the land, but it also identifies the community tribal right over the land and forest resources. Per se, it makes Gram Sabha the authority to decide the use of the forest land. What they can do with this, whether they want to grow more plants or whether they want to use it for community purpose. Also, the Gram Sabha is given the authority that whenever any outsider want to do something with the forest land or over there, they will have to take a consent from the Gram Sabha. Now, this applies to any infrastructure project that is project that wants to pass through the tribal area. It applies to mining project that is supposed to pass through the tribal area. They have to take the consent from the Gram Sabha. So this act in paper was very empowering. However, implementation is always being controversial because of the continuous rejection of the claim of the tribal people and the exclusion due to bureaucratic hurdles. So now let's move ahead to that part. That why this why they are not able to take the benefit. But before that, let's come to the data. That what does the recent data suggest? Number one, it suggests that if there is 100 land-related conflict in India, then 33% of the conflict are due to the improper or conflict related to Forest Right Act. But this is surprising. Tribal constitute only 8% of the tribal population. The area is relatively larger, but even this is not in good proportion. That then a dispute should have been settled in a much amicable manner. Second, it also talk about that out of 781 conflict that they have mapped, 264 are in constituency where FR is very crucial. It's not as if they will get some other benefit, but for the sustenance, for the livelihood, it is very important. And 117 are directly affecting forest dwelling communities, which ultimately impact of 6.1 lakh people. So 6.1 lakh people are impacted because of the proper implementation of the Forest Right Act. Also, the important data over here is that nearly 44% of the conflict are triggered by the conservation and forestry project. That means the forest department and its attitude, it's responsible for the improper implementation of the Forest Rights Act. Number two, it talked about 88% of conflict involved non-implementation or violation of key FRA provisions. The key FRA provisions that directly or if explicitly give the rights to tribal are not being properly implemented. Now let's move ahead to the reason behind the improper implementation of the Forest Rights Act. Number one is the exclusion within the criteria itself. The Act provides a specific criteria where you have to give the document, and often tribals who are unaware, uneducated, do not have the required documents. Because tribals did not have the habit of keeping the document, they were forest dweller and had a very simple way of living. And thus they often marginalized in the entire process, provided the fact they are dependent on the forest resources and do not meet the prescribed criteria. Second, the bureaucratic hurdles. Though the act has come, the mindset of bureaucrats has not changed. They still consider forest as a revenue resource, not as a livelihood resource for the forest. So they don't want to let go of their right over the forest. And because of the reason, it involves multiple the delay by the bureaucratic process. Also, you have to understand the bureaucratic process is already very cumbersome. The multiple hurdles are there. You have to reach the multiple agency, take a consent from them, and then can only you can claim your asset or your land right. But this is not possible because of the entire cumbersome process. Now, the next is the conflict with the other law. Even if the bureaucrats agree, often it comes in conflict with the other law, like Wildlife Protection Act, like other environmental conservation law. Like per se, if a forest dweller says that this is the piece of land that belongs to me, then government can say that under the Forest Wildlife Act, a particular wildlife species is to be conserved, like tiger in particular area. So tribals are not allowed to live over there. So this is the piece of land we can't give. Now there is a genuine concern on both sides, but the tribal is on the losing part over here, and a compensatory land is not given to them. Next is overall lack of awareness. Even if there was an alternative, even if the tribal had to present the document to them, they're in general aware of what to do or the legal grievance mechanism that is available to them. So which also creates the issue of the non-availability of the rights of the forest dwellers. And lastly, the lack of overall political will had led to ineffective implementation of Forest Rights Act, which is actually visible at various level of governance, be it neither Gram Sabha, neither state government, neither center government, because they have vested interests and competing priorities. Often, political parties are motivated to let the infrastructure project pass over that because the big corporates are giving money for it, because the development is also the priority, because the urban consumer bias is presenting the existing government itself. And thus, as a result, the Forest Rights Act is not properly implemented. Also, some data is also important that article talk about it, that among all the states, Maharashtra, Odisha, and MP have the highest number of core FRA constituency. Remember, most number of tribes are also found in these three states. Also, the state with most conflict, where the FRA-related conflict are found, are basically Odisha, Chhattisgarh, and Jammu Kashmir. And this is surprising, but this actually creates that the tribal which are greater in number are able to resolve the issue, and often somehow, but not always. And even where the lesser number of tribes are there, they're not able to resolve these particular issues. Now, what if that is done by the government? Now, since it was an article which has a political inclination to it, and the article came around the election area, the Congress has also come up with its own manifesto, that is tribal manifesto, where it is promising that there will be a speedy settlement of the pending FRA claims. Along with that, the government in power, the Minister of Tribal Affairs, has urged the state and union to properly update revenue on forest record for the settling forest right under the PM Janman scheme. So PM Janman scheme deals with the providing the forest right to the particularly vulnerable types. So PM Janman scheme और प्रधानमंत्री जनजाति आदिवासी न्याय महा Abhiyan is basically an Indian government initiative aimed at socio-economic development of the particularly or PVGT, particularly vulnerable tribes. It was launched in 2033. It was implemented by Ministry of Tribal Affairs in collaboration with state government and focuses on integrating these community into the mainstream society through various interventions. So PM Janman scheme is also a basically initiative which wants to make sure that FR is being implemented. But the tribal manifesto, or maybe the tribal the welfare is not enough. It is important that tribals are integrated in the process, and a more fast, speedy track mechanism can be brought to make sure that the tribes have the right to the resources that maintain their livelihood practices. So with this, we are done with today's news.
Since we are done with the news, the next step is to discuss the prelims questions regarding that, so that you know or I know how much you've learned from the current news. Now, the first question over here is, consider the following statement about CDP Suraksha platform. So, the statement that you have to read are these three. Number one, CDP Suraksha is a platform that uses e-rupee voucher system to facilitate cashless, contactless payment directly to vendor. Now, if you remember, when I taught you CDP Suraksha, I talked about e-rupee voucher. And here the cashless and contactless payment system was mentioned over there. Okay. Next is, the platform integrates a content management system and cloud-based server space provided by the National Information Center. NIC was there. Like I talked about, the content management system will also be there. Now, the platform CDP Suraksha allow farmers to pay the full cost upfront for the material, and subsidy is reimbursed upon the verification. Acha, if you remember, this statement is right. This statement is also right. And this statement over here, which by the full cost upfront, I discussed that if 100 rupees is to be paid by the farmer, at the buying process itself, he will pay only 60. Rest of the 40%, a voucher is given to him by which the verification will be done. He doesn't have to pay the entire amount. So the answer is, of course, 1 and 2 only. And don't be confused over here, the vendor will get the money. Don't confuse that farmer will get the money. Of course, the farmer is not getting the money. Farmer is getting what? Farmer is getting a subsidy at the payment mechanism itself. So the money will go to the vendor, and the farmer doesn't have to pay the full cost. So listen carefully and answer carefully whenever you're answering any question. Second question, that is from the Cluster Development Program and the same news article that we discussed. CDP focus primarily on increasing the direct export capabilities of individual farmer. So export capabilities and individual farmers. So just two terms that you have to take care of over here. The name itself, cluster development program, that cluster involves individual farmer. And didn't I tell you directly over there that individual farmer, the focus over here is the cluster. So of course you should question the statement. Second is, the program emphasizes a cluster-based approach to harness geographical specialization and integrated market-led development. I have even given example to the statement that is given over there. I said, like in Rajasthan, guava is very famous and many farmers do it together. So cluster-based approach is very famous over there. So of course it does the things that are mentioned in the statement. Third is, CDP is designed to provide individual subsidy for purchasing agriculture equipment rather than developing infrastructure. Even if you read the statement, you don't know the information, you should be able to cut the statement. Reason is, rather than developing infrastructure, UPSC does not generally prefer a statement like that, A rather than B. So you can just simply cut 3, and by this we are coming with the answer 2. So the answer is B. So the answer is right from what we have learned and the how much from we know about the UPSC. Now third question is from the volcanic rings that we talked about. From there we discuss Mount Etna, and the question is from there that Mount Etna is the highest Mediterranean island mountain and the most active stratovolcano of the world in the world. Okay, we heard that statement, and then I discussed what are stratovolcanoes as well. Then so just see the other statement. They have relatively steep side. I made the diagram and I said how steep they are and are more cone-shaped than the shield volcanoes. And I told you why shield volcanoes are like that, whereas the stratovolcanoes are like that, because of the material which they are made up of. One is acidic and other one is basic. Stratovolcanoes are formed from viscous sticky lava and does not flow easily. Of course, that is true. They're acidic. They're silica-based material, so they have more viscosity. They stick and they do not flow easily, and that's why they are more like they are steeper inside. On the other hand, basic, they can flow easily. They have less viscosity, and thus they are shield volcanoes. So the state two, like if you read that conceptually, all the 3 statements are right. So the answer is going to be 3 only. Now let's move to another question, that is about microplastic. We talked about that. We talked about the dimensions as well. So, and if you had forgotten the dimension, of course, you may not easily answer the question. Microplastic are defined as plastic particles that are up to 10 mm in diameter. Hey, I remember I said 50 mm specifically, up to or lesser than 50 mm. Second, polyvinyl chloride and polypropylene are among the most common type of microplastic found in nature. So statement 1 is wrong, but you remember these are the 2 particular microplastic that are found in nature that we discuss even in question. So only 2 is right, the 1 is wrong. The last PT question that we'll discuss is about from the Forest Right Act, and the UPSC is asked this question. So from there, the question is, which of the following best describe the primary purpose of the scheduled drive and other traditional forest dweller recognition of Forest Act of 2006? Don't be confused. Even the article itself, I state that this is basically the legal name of the Forest Right Act. Now, what are the purpose? Number 1, to facilitate the industrial access. The scheduled drive and industry doesn't generally come together. So, of course, you can just by general understanding, you can cancel this. Provide legal recognition and protection of the forest rights and livelihood of tribal community. Now that makes sense. That does, right? That was the definition of, that was the aims and objective of the Forest Right Act. So this makes sense. Now let's analyze other question, other statement. Increase government control of the forest resources. This will never help the scheduled tribe. You can cancel it here itself. To promote the wildlife conservation and establishment of protected areas without human interference. If you had not read Forest Right Act, maybe you'd agreed with this. But since you've read, you know often the wildlife conservation measures comes in contradiction with the Forest Right Act. So the statement is not right. Only the statement B is right. So our answer is B. Okay. Now let's move ahead. Moves to the practice one main question. The question has, India has experienced a high rate of inflation in recent year, especially in food sector. What are the possible causes for India facing such recurrent phenomena, and suggest some steps that can be taken by the government to control it? I have discussed the aspect of details related to food inflation, and the question is very specific. It's not very general. So you'd have to deal that. Now, how are we going to approach this question? Number 1, Since you're asking about inflation in exam, you are expected to first define what is inflation. Then I do the same thing. I did not just start telling you about inflation, its strain, how it's going to impact India, how why we have inflation. First, tell about what is inflation, a general rise in price level over a period of time in an economy. Don't miss any of the component. And then you're going to talk about the inflation generally like impact India, but food inflation is something that is very consistent. And why? Because of number one, there can be immediate reason, but here you will focus more and perhaps try to put structural reason before the other reason. So structural reasons will come over there. So number one is introduction part, where you will talk about inflation. Number two is body part. Okay, so in body part, you will talk about the causes of inflation, that is immediate as well as the structural inflation. And you know structural inflation because we skip the manufacturing sector. That's why technology integration is less. It is expensive, and thus we're not able to integrate, which has made us vulnerable to climate change and so many things which technology could have prevented easily. Also, our supply chain is very ineffective in terms of transportation, connectivity, storage, warehousing, all the other elements you add, and then you have a reason why we have a food inflation, because easily the food items cannot move to the folk, and we don't have the phenomena to increase the shelf life or the life of food articles, and thus it is very seasonal. You see seasonal inflation in India. Now, what will you do after this? After this, you will talk about what is the impact. The body should also include impact so that you can give a suggestion. And you will not write a very comprehensive some points to that, because this is not our focus. We are just adding it as a connector. And you will talk about how producer is impacted because the rates are not cut, and he can't avail much like credit at lower rates because RBI goes for the rate spiking. And how it's actually impact the production as well, and how it impacts the consumers, especially the poor consumers who are very dependent on food items, and majority of the income goes on consuming the food items. Lastly, then you will talk about suggestions. And suggestions, like I said in the article itself, should have a two aspect. That is a short-term suggestion, that when you're facing it, what to do, be that monetary policy solution, or be that budgetary solution, or the administrative solution, open market operations, or export-import control, whatever. And then long-term solution are the one that you will go for. That is structural reforms, in which we will talk about infrastructure, warehousing, etc. That whatever that we have discussed in the article. With this, we are done with the today's news as well as article. I hope you like it. If you so, then stay tuned to 9IS.